evening, everyone. I'm so glad you're here tonight. Ready? So this is a joint presentation tonight by the Portsmouth Historical Society. That's this building you're in right now. This is their museum, our museum. My name is Stephen Luce, and I'm one of the directors.
He said you look good.
Oh, I think. In conjunction with the Battle of Rhode Island Association. We really appreciate those of you that are members. We couldn't make the things happen here that we do without your support. Just to give you a few updates of what we've done recently. We've done lighting, new lighting downstairs in the museum, so as you look at our displays, you'll be able to actually see them a lot better now. Currently, we're putting a new roof on the 1725 schoolhouse, which is the oldest in Rhode Island and arguably the oldest wooden schoolhouse in America. And we're also replacing the roof on this building here. Again, all of which from your support and from other foundations as well. Let's see, we have upcoming events coming up, which are happening November 16th is the next event. The title is Indigenous People of Portsmouth during the colonial period, and that'll be given by yours truly. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your patience right now. Usually it is Becky Sattel or Craig Clark who do this opening, and neither of those are here right now, and they've entrusted it with me. So that's why I'm looking down at my notes right here. They've given me the main things to point out. And then after that, December 6th is our annual meeting. So please, by all means, come by for that when you can. All right, you're not here to hear me. You are here to hear a presentation given by Mr. Waller. Mr. Waller is a lifelong resident of Rhode Island and is on the Board of Trustees for the South County History Center. He received his BA in anthropology from URI in 1993 and his MA in anthropology, specializing in Northeastern archaeology, in 1998. Mr. Waller has been involved in hundreds of archaeological projects, conducting archaeological research on Narragansett, Wampanoag, and Nipmuc Indian lands for the past 30 years. So without further delay, please welcome Mr. Jim Waller.
Thank you, Stephen. So if any of you doubt my credentials about the hundreds of projects I've been involved in, our state archaeologist is here and she can verify that that's true. She's read all my reports ad nauseum. So thank you all for coming tonight. And I really appreciate this opportunity. And I do have to mention that this presentation is part of a number of presentations for Rhode Island Archaeology Month, which is being hosted and organized through Charlotte Taylor's office, the Rhode Island Historical Preservation and Heritage Commission. And in fact, when she was first looking for topics to talk about, I said, I don't know, I've talked on so much stuff. Everybody's sick of what I have to say. And she's the one actually suggested, she's like, well, we'll do the battlefield stuff. So thank you, Charlotte, for kicking me in the butt and making me move forward with this. I did read the blurb notifying this on the website, and it erroneously identifies me as doctor. I went through the process, did all the classwork, had 2 drafts of my dissertation, but I never finished it. So I do not have the PhD. So if that dissuades any of you for sticking around, I'll give you 5 minutes to walk out. That's what I figured. So, okay, so you're all sticking around, great. So I'm going to talk about some of the archaeological metal detecting we've been doing for the Battle of Rhode Island. And first I want to point out this lovely watercolor here that was done by artist Murray Norcross here. It's a great print. I actually have a copy on my wall as well. But if anybody's interested, the website there is there's still more prints available for anybody who may be interested in having their own copy. So as Stephen mentioned, I thank you at the Portsmouth Historical Society for hosting me tonight and opening up your doors for me. Please consider supporting these historical societies. As we all know, most individuals are not getting the detailed history in school anymore at the federal level, certainly at the state level, and God forbid, forget the local level. So really, these are gems, and all history is local history. So really consider supporting your local historical society. There we go. As Stephen mentioned, I'm a senior archaeologist with the Public Archaeology Laboratory. We do archaeology for a living. So my company is involved in a number of different projects, and we assist clients with various tasks that are related to historical preservation. We do archaeological survey, architectural survey, cemetery investigations, cultural resource management plans. You can read the whole list of what it is we do. So we do a lot of work with clients, assisting them through the federal, state, and municipal mandated process for considering historical resources and their effects a project may have on them. Cultural resource management, that's my profession, that's what we do. So the government, thankfully, has acknowledged that cultural resources are finite and that they're important to everybody. So, and there's the definition of a cultural resource, but from what I do in my office, most of the work we do is associated with archaeology, we deal with buildings, we deal with bridges and other engineering marvels, burial grounds and cemeteries, traditional cultural properties, and of course, in this instance, while we're all here, battlefields. This work is, I've been working with the Battle of Rhode Island Association. They have a nice table downstairs, so please, if you're interested in the Battle of Rhode Island's role in the American Revolution, please consider, getting more information from them, looking into learning about our role and the role that the Battle of Rhode Island played in American history. And we will touch on that. But we are here to talk about the Battle of Rhode Island. So there's a couple journals of individuals who actually were there that day. And I found the first quote very, very interesting from Johann Conrad Dohle. He specifically said that the incident, the battle itself, states the date, was one of the most memorable in the history of the American War. How many of you heard about the Battle of Rhode Island when you were in school? No, exactly. And in fact, last night I was actually at a dinner with a former naval officer as well as an airline pilot, and I mentioned, I was like, oh, I'm giving a talk on the Battle of Rhode Island. I was like, Battle of Rhode Island, what was that? So us now, many of us have never even heard of it, but at the time they even recognized how significant this event was. And, Stephen Popp himself, he said we had a major attack from the rebels. Major, this wasn't a skirmish, major attack. And General Sullivan, who was in command of Rhode Island at the time, he said, the number of the dead I've not able to ascertain, but we know them to be very considerable. This was no small engagement. It was something significant that happened right here, literally outside these doors. So, very, very high level summary of the events leading up to the Battle of Rhode Island. In 1776, the British occupy Newport. 1778, in March, General Sullivan takes command of the Rhode Island Theater. In July, that same month, Washington orders Sullivan to take Newport from the British. On July 24th of 1778, Sullivan is informed that his reinforcements were on the way, so he delays the attack. In later July, General Robert Pigot, in command of the British forces, he withdraws his British forces north from Windmill Hill back towards Newport. In August, beginning of August, leading up to the weeks before now, Sullivan informs the Comte d'Estaing that he intends to move against the British. Sullivan learns that the British have evacuated northern Aquidneck Island, and he moves his troops across the Saconnet River from Fort Barton and takes the northern part of the island. D'Estaing learns that Howe and the British Navy have arrived at Rhode Island, and he informs Sullivan he intends to engage the British. So later, on August 10th, the British and the French engage, the navies engage, but the battle is thwarted by a gale, which both sides took significant damage from the gale. On August 15th, Sullivan orders his troops to advance on Newport. So they're at the northern Aquidneck Island. They start advancing towards and pushing their way towards Newport. 5 days later, D'Estaing returns and informs Sullivan that we're not doing well. We're going to withdraw to retire to Boston to fix our ships. So that's leading up to the engagement itself. The Battle of Rhode Island occurred on August 29th, 1778, but the day before, Sullivan orders his troops to withdraw from northern Aquidneck Island and establishes his post at Butts Hill. And many of you know the fort is still there, although what we're looking at now is really the French engineering of it. It looked a little bit different at the time of the battle, but that's where Sullivan establishes his post. August 29th, Piggott decides to hinder the American retreat from the island, and the Battle of Rhode Island begins. Estimates vary, but some estimates have us, the American casualties, about 30 killed, 137 wounded, and 44 missing. Among the British side, we have 38 killed, 210 wounded, and 44 missing. This was no small engagement. There were a lot of fatalities. And on the following day, August 30th, Sullivan orders the evacuation of Aquidneck Island. And the battle is over. Part of the reason why we don't hear about it is it wasn't an American victory. So, you kind of sweep it under the rug. But it is something that should be recognized. A lot of people were involved. It was right outside our windows and our doors here, and it was pretty significant. So first thing I want to point out, these maps are not mine. They were created by Christian McBurney with the Portsmouth Historical Society. And Christian really literally wrote the book on the Battle of Rhode Island, which it's a great book. I refer to it all the time. But the day of the battle, rightfully so, we often hear when people do know about it or have heard about it, they really are aware of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment, the 1st Integrated Regiment, and the attack by the Hessians on the 1st Rhode Island, and the heroism of the 1st Rhode Island repelling the Hessian advance multiple times. But there was more to the battle than that, and it was smaller, it was much larger rather, than just what occurred on West Main Road. The Battle of Rhode Island is listed in the National Register of Historic Places. The property itself on the National Register form is actually split. You have the main battlefield here, and you have Butts Hill Fort area itself up here. So being that it is on the National Register, it gives it a little more acknowledged historical significance. Now, a little bit about how I got involved in this. So it was in the spring of 2022 when the Battle of Rhode Island Association was developing their master plan for the Butts Hill Fort. And at the time, they wanted to include in that master plan historical and archaeological assessment of the property. And through various networks, I received wind from other archaeologists that the association was looking for possibly a student to do an assessment of the post itself and come up with an archaeological sensitivity, identifying, what's the potential there for archaeology. So at that point in time, I have a personal interest in American Revolution history. I'm a local Rhode Islander. So this was something that was pretty interesting to me. And being a professional, understanding what was necessary to put together an assessment, I was under the opinion that I don't think this is something a student could handle or was prepared to deal with, because there were too many other things that were necessary to research, to get access to, that not all students would have. So I decided to volunteer my time, and I put together this assessment. And the assessment actually is available to review on the Battle of Rhode Island Association website. A month after I finished my draft, the Battle of Rhode Island, and Paul's right here as well, but they decided to, oh, there you are right there.
I'm the red coat.
Oh, that's you in the red coat. Perfect. Wasn't that lovely? It's almost like we staged that photograph. So, so they hosted a Walk the Battlefield day. Now, it wasn't the entire battlefield, but it was kind of shrunk and done on Turkey Hill, where they had all these stations where they went through to discuss what happened that day. The movement of the troops up East Main Road, West Main Road, some of the engagements, and where things were, and then, of course, pointed out from the hill where these actual locations were. One of the interesting things that came about that was several property owners that live in Portsmouth reached out to the association and said, you know what, I own property that's in the battlefield itself. Said, would you be interested in doing some sort of research on there? And so that's me not being able to keep my mouth shut was one that I said, oh, that sounds really, really interesting. But if you do that, my recommendation would be you follow archaeological best practices. And I got the response, that sounds great. Will you take the lead on that? So that's how I got involved in this, and of course I volunteered to do that. And did I skip a slide, or am I just out of order here? Okay. So, as I said, we mentioned there was a couple property owners. The first one was up there on Freeborn Street. One of the property owners said, hey, you know, my property's in it. Another is on Prospect Lane, Paul's property. And so we knew that there was a potential there because it was in the limits of the known actions of the day. And here we are right here at the Portsmouth Historical Society, which also was involved, or at least located within where some of the action occurred. As I said we should follow archaeological best practices. And I have been trained in conflict archaeology and battlefield archaeology. Back in 2017, I did a workshop at the Bennington battlefield. Bennington was one of the operations that that was pivotal to the failure of Burgoyne at the Saratoga campaign. And it occurred in August of 1777. And just recently, I was involved. I attended a week-long workshop of the archaeology of firearms, which into ballistics, archaeological ballistics, and that sort of stuff. So I am trained in this, and this was one of the reasons why, knowing what we've known, knowing what archaeologists have been able to put together to learn about actions and interpreting events on battlefields. You know, I knew we had an opportunity to study more than just, hey, we found a cannonball, or hey, we found a musket ball associated with this battle. We can actually learn something about their distributions. So that's what I was pitching to the association. So archaeological metal detecting in battlefield archaeology. We are using metal detectors, and there is a lot you can learn just from using archaeological metal detecting on battlefields. But first of all, the first things first, archaeological metal detecting is not about the things themselves. It's about what those things can tell us about behaviors and actions. And that's true for archaeology in general. When my 25 years, almost 30 now, of archaeological experience, I'm a trained Native American archaeologist. I'm not interested in the arrowheads. I'm not interested in the knives. I'm interested in their distribution, what they can tell about pattern life ways, and learning about what these people lived, what they did, how they died, and more than just they made things. And that's what battlefield archaeology can do too. It's not about the things themselves, but what we can learn by studying those things and their patterning on the landscape. Archaeological metal detecting is systematic. You don't just go out there generally and just start swinging a detector around and finding stuff. You want to kind of look at areas in controlled ways so you know you're collecting and maximizing the amount of data you're collecting. Each artifact, each individual artifact is individually mapped to preserve its spatial patterning and permit interpretation. You don't just take them and put everything in a bag and say, oh, look what we found at the end of the day. It's just like, okay, this artifact is collected individually, it's sub-meter GPS to a specific location, or it's mapped in with a total station. So its patterning on the landscape is preserved. We record the depth of the artifact, where it came out within the ground, and what soil level it was recovered from. Artifacts are cleaned, they're examined, they're analyzed, and they're cataloged. And entire assemblages are curated. This way they're available for future study. If additional research is found, the artifact is still there, or the entire assemblage is still there to permit additional and future analysis that may not be available to us at the present. And in fact, I will note that the collections that we have from the work that we have done is being held right here at the Portsmouth Historical Society. The landowner recognizes the significance of it, and everything we found has been given to here to be curated at the PHS so that it's protected and collected and held in perpetuity. And like I'm doing tonight, archaeological metal detection, the information is shared. We share all this with everybody. No individual person owns, in our opinion, the past. It belongs to all of us. So it's pivotal that we actually share what we found with everybody so everybody is aware of what it is we've done and can learn about our shared past. So this isn't the first go-around. with archaeological metal detecting. There's been a number of sites. Some of the more significant ones are here's a picture of, this is artist Don Troiani's drawing of Molly Pitcher at the Battle of Monmouth. And there's been archaeology done there, where by doing the same thing, piece plotting things, the archaeologists were able to determine where the British line was, where the American line was, the lines of fire, and where everything occurred. Closer to home is the Parker's Revenge site at Minuteman National Park. Captain John Parker was in command of the militia on the morning of April 19th, 1775 on Lexington Green at 5 a.m. when the British came up. His militia was the one that was fired upon by the British. Later on that day, of course, several were killed. The militia scattered. Later on that day, after Concord Bridge, at the North Bridge, and the militia started pushing back, Parker flanked the British and did significant damage to the British column. So that's why it's called Parker's Revenge. He sought revenge from what happened to him and his militia earlier in the day. But at Minuteman National Park, Dr. Meg Wilkes Waters was her maiden name. She ran a series of archaeological investigations. Which was interesting is local lore and oral history told us where this engagement occurred. The archaeology showed that it didn't quite occur where everybody had thought it occurred. They were able to demonstrably demonstrate where Parker set up his lines, how many volleys they got off before they retreated as the British column continued down the Battle Road. So I go back to Johann Conrad Dohle again. One of the interesting things, I read this quote and I shook my head, and he said, "The dear Lord held his blessed hand over us and fortunately turned so many thousand balls from our 2 regiments." 1,000 balls. It's remarkable that only 70 or so individuals were killed, several hundred were wounded, considering how much firing occurred that day. But what are we looking for when we do archaeological metal detecting? Of course, we do see balls. We see I actually have a pointer right here. So these here are flint wraps, musket flint wraps, fired balls. You can find gun flints. Sometimes, occasionally, you can find the locks themselves. The regimental buttons, bayonets, all this stuff. Anything that was there on their person at the time of battle, you can find on these sites, and there's actually several great books on a number of artifacts in materials that are associated and that they wore. This is one that's from a collector's edition. This one over here I actually find really, really interesting. This is it was written in the 50s, but it's an archaeological book on several of the Revolutionary War sites, and this is actually an inventory of a lot of the artifacts that came out of archaeology. But there are volumes of these reports of what it is you can find. But that's the long and the short of it. If these people had it on them at the time of these engagements, you can find them. And if it's metallic, you're going to find it with metal detectors. There we go. So what can musket balls themselves tell us? Why is it, why can't you just go and remove a musket ball? And a lot of these photographs are that I'm about to use, that came out of Doug Scott's and Joel Bowie's forensic analysis of a musket shot. Doug Scott, he's actually one of my instructors down at Springfield Arsenal, but Doug's claim to fame is he is the father of conflict and battlefield archaeology. He's the one who actually did the work in the late 80s, early 90s at Little Bighorn. And because of that, was able to figure out exactly what happened, the action of the day at Custer's Last Stand. So by looking at balls themselves, you can learn a little bit. You can sometimes tell something about the manufacturing of the balls themselves. You can look at them and determine if they were fired or if they're unfired. Both of them say different things when you look at these things. A fired ball means something a little different than an unfired ball. You can look at impacts. Sometimes there's actually remnants of what they struck, so you can tell what they struck. You can look at the ball and see how it moved in the barrel of the musket and see firing damage. Here's smoothing as it banged up and down up inside the bore as it was fired. You can see ramrod strikes where they're jamming them down. And in this case, it's what's called buck and ball. One of the things that they would sometimes do, you'd take a ball and you take 3 buckshot on top of it. And so when you fired a musket and all of a sudden the balls would shatter as well. You can actually oftentimes see the imprint of the ball and where the 3 buckshot were. So you can tell a little bit about how they were used, what they did, and how they were, how the small arm was loaded. By looking at its deformation, you can also tell a little about its airspeed when it hit something. Was it traveling very, very slow? Was it traveling moderately fast? Or was it, full on, just right out of the barrel, hitting something at full velocity? And yes, you can even sometimes look at them and see if they have evidence of blood and if they've hit somebody. Surprisingly, it's not, luminol testing is not that expensive, $50 a sample. It, it's less than definitive. There are more definitive tests, but you can actually look at some of the balls and say, you determine if they hit somebody and if they have evidence of blood. But as you know, a battlefield, people just don't drop balls, and you look at a musket ball, they don't all look round because they've hit things, they've impacted, they've ricocheted, they've done everything. So it's always good to know, what the bore diameter is for those balls that are deformed. And thankfully, Dan Sivelich here, he literally wrote the book on musket balls. And through his exhaustive analysis of a number of balls from Monmouth, from Saratoga, from Camden, he came up with an equation to allow you to reconstruct a ball diameter from a struck ball based on lead weight from the time and various mathematics. Now that of course assumes that there is no loss of the musket ball itself, like it's sheared and went in 2 pieces. But assuming the item is intact and it's just deformed, you can actually figure out the caliber of fired balls. And why is this important? Well, that tells us about what's going on. Because, and I'm referring specifically to the Battle of Rhode Island here, we know from records and we know from who was there that there was a number of small firearms that were on site during the battle. We have the French Charlevilles. The French had supplied us, we had French Charlevilles on hand. Of course, the British long pattern rifle, commonly known as the Brown Bess, they were the standard arm of the time. They were here. The Hessians were here. Some adopted the British, were armed by the British, so they had Brown Besses. Others brought their own from their regimental units. So they have German muskets here. And of course, the Americans themselves, particularly the militia companies, they were using stuff that was being manufactured locally. And so they have their own muskets that were here. And the reason why that's important is each one of these, they all had different calibers, which means they all fired different balls. So if you can get an idea of what the caliber of the musket is, you might be able to figure out what it is, what kind of service weapon fired it, which will give you information on who was standing where at the time of the engagements. So that's, you have these little lead pieces, round lead pieces. A lot can be learned from just these little small spherical lead balls. So to get back to the battle itself, here we are. We had our 2 sites that we had permission to look at, and we know that at about 2 o'clock, here's General Sullivan 2 days later when he wrote to Congress about this. He said that they were camped on Butts Hill, and then early in the morning, the British advanced in 2 columns up the streets. And the action of the day starts. There we go. So first thing an archaeologist always does when we're working on a site, we want to learn what we can about the property, about the site, about what happened, so we can kind of have a handle on what it is we did or what we can expect to find. So given that the British had come into Newport in 1776, and were here for quite some time, they actually had time to develop really detailed maps of the area. And here's the map that's on file at the Huntington Library, a British map dated 1778. And here's Northern Aquidneck Island, here's details of it. So right before the battle in 1778, here's the 2 properties as they look. Here's the on Freeborn Street, you can see that you kind of have a cleared field area. You see stone walls that are here, and you have the Bloody Brook Swamp going through here. So that's what it looked like, at the time of the battle. Down on Prospect Lane, we have the Quaker Meeting House right here. British columns the regimental columns were just south. There was another column over here, so we do know that they were in the neighborhood, as well as, again, you got open fields, you got the stone walls. So that's what the battlefield, these properties looked like at the time of the battle. Flash forward a couple years, we looked at period maps again, same sort of thing going on here, not much different, but this is how the landscape looked on August 29th, 1778. Keep switching the wrong hand. Come on. There we go. So here we are down here. So before we get to that, I do have to state, I've been working with the Battle of Rhode Island Association for about a year and a half, 2 years now. And I have to give credit to the Portsmouth Historical Society. One of the projects they were planning on doing is planning on doing is right out here, they need to put in a new septic system for the facility. And I was approached by them saying, hey, you know what, we're into historic preservation. We should probably look, since we do know, here we are right here, some of the action that occurred that morning, the first action as a matter of fact, happened right outside these doors. Although this building wasn't here at the time, it happened right out here. So the board, the Portsmouth Historical Society was like, well, we have to consider that, is there any historic resources here? So at that point in time, my advisor from the University of Connecticut offered to do some archaeological testing of just where the septic system was going to be. And lo and behold, knowing that I'm here, he kind of called me up and strong-armed me into volunteering my time. So he and I came out here and we dug a few test pits to look at the integrity and see if we could find anything. Well, we didn't find anything associated with it. When they put the building in, right where they're going to put the septic in, was fairly disturbed. So if there was anything here, it's been disturbed by subsequent occupation and use of the property. However, later on last fall, several of the volunteers that had been working with the Battle of Rhode Island Association, they came here and they volunteered their time to do some metal detecting around here as well. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of debris in the yard. There's a lot of nails associated with the old roofing here, construction, use of the property. So there's a lot of noise in the ground, and they didn't really find much. However, so here we are right here. This is the location of where the septic system is going to go, where we did our testing. You're coming up the middle roads back here, East Main Road's down here. So the columns came up here, one column broke off here and then went up that way. So this was an area where some of the activity occurred. But we didn't find much when we were doing our archaeology. When they came out here and did the metal detecting back last fall, they did find this one period that looks to be a period British coin. So there is some hints that there might be something associated with the battle in this area as well. But that brings us back to the larger site up for Freeborn Street, where we've done a series of investigations starting around about a year ago now. So to give a little context, so you all understand what it is we were looking at when we did this work, the sites would be kind of outside the map up here a little bit. But at about 8 o'clock in the morning, as the columns were passing by here, the American forces started retreating up East Main Road. On the east side of the road, you have the First Rhode Island attack hasn't occurred yet, but you have the Hessian troops moving up on the West Main Road. But Von Hune, here's the one that's going to be interesting, because he actually kind of turns off this way and comes up this way. But 9:15, a little later in the morning, the British have pushed their way up to Quaker Hill, and they're in and here comes Von Hune, and the Americans start withdrawing north up East Main Road. And eventually, by about 9:45 in the morning, half hour later, they pushed all the way through Freeborn Street. The Americans are set up in a line across the island. Sullivan's up here at Butts Hill Fort, and you have the British regiments kind of sitting in front of Butts Hill. So based on what we know in the mapping, who may have been present in this site that we were working on? Well, our most likely candidates from the American side were Colonel William Shepard's Massachusetts Regiment of Continentals. There was Colonel Edward Wigglesworth of Massachusetts Regiment of Continentals, and Colonel John Lawrence, advance guard, John Lawrence was the son of Henry Lawrence, who was the president of the Continental Congress at the time. On the British side, we have the 22nd Regiment of Foot, and we have the 54th Regiment of Foot. So these are the regiments that were in the vicinity. We know that we're in the vicinity of where we were doing our investigations. So as I said, we mobilized several times. We didn't want to really inconvenience the property owner, so we were only doing a few hours at a time, but we did it over a series of times, just not to get in his hair. So we first went out there on October 19th when we were all just thinking about getting fat for Thanksgiving. It's like, okay, well, here we go. Let's go burn some calories. So we went out. Here's the locations of some of the finds that we recovered at the time. We returned a couple weeks later in December, found a bit more. April 30th after the winter, although we probably last winter without all the snow, we probably could have gone all winter, but we didn't. And then finally in June of this year was the last time we were out on the property. And I have to thank you, Jim, for organizing all that. Thank you very much. So yes, we did, as you can imagine, it's a historical farm field. So there's is often the case, there's a lot of noise in the ground. There's a lot of stuff associated with 19th and 20th century agricultural use out there, but certainly we did find artifacts and materials associated with the engagement. Found musket balls. This here actually is another, which appears to be a British coin. So there's stuff out there. What else did we find, which I'll talk about now. So we did find a flat button, which would have been on a regimental coat. A knee buckle on the pants. And we found a couple of 18th century shoe buckles. So there are other items out there that are associated with possibly associated with the uniforms. I can't say for certain that these artifacts are all exactly what we would expect from the forces that were there. So there's a likelihood, but again, there's a possibility it could have been, some of the farmers and stuff of the 18th century. But these are the artifacts and materials that we would expect. They are period correct at the time, and they were worn on the uniforms. So the property itself, these are active farm fields, and this whole area is overgrown, but these two were fields at one time. But there's a stone wall that runs around here, and there's another stone wall that runs around here. Interesting enough, if you look at the 1778 map of the area, those stone walls were there then. So these are original walls that were there at the day of the engagement that are still there. And if you read a number of firsthand accounts from the soldiers that were there, they specifically mention how useful stone walls were. Right here, they stationed themselves behind a stone wall. There was always shot upon shot, and we wrangled them for some time, hence the name of my talk. It came out of Stephen Pop's quote. We had to climb over many stone walls, 5 to 6 feet high, and they took post behind these and fired through the openings. So they were using these stone walls, and again, here's another quote, and these from several of the soldiers that were there. But these stone walls, understandably so, they provided some cover, so they were using them, which is not surprising. And it allows us to have some interpretation of what's going on there. So what you see in red on this image, these are the locations where we found musket balls in this field. A closer inspection of them shows that most of them were fired. Now these two up here, these are just generally plotted. We did not locate them. There was a previous metal detectorist that went out there and just found stuff, but he didn't locate where he found the stuff. We just were told that it came from that area, so I put them on there. And if we had locational data, it probably would have helped us with the interpretation more, hence why we like to have locational data on all this stuff. But these balls here were all fired, and this one down here appears to have been a drop ball. There was no evidence of firing. It was perfectly round, had the sprue on it, the little nub from where it was nipped off from the molding. And so we're able to see some patterning in the musket balls themselves. Based on bore diameter, several of these fired balls look to be American, on the American side, where these here, the drop ball, it was a .69 caliber, which was standard issue for Brown Bess at the time. And these two also are in the diameter of the British land pattern musket. So most of them appear to have been fired American balls, where we have a couple British balls as well. In addition to those, we found some non-musketry artifacts, which I showed you previously, but that's where these came from. You have your shoe buckles, you have your coin, you have your button, your knee buckle. And based on the patterning, the size of the balls and everything, we're starting to get a kind of a picture. It's preliminary only, but it's a picture. It looks like the patterning of firing came from East Main Road towards the wall. We've done limited testing over here, and we have to do more. We haven't found anything on that side. So it looks like the impacted balls all were fired this way, and they hit the stone wall as the firing was coming off East Main Road. It came either from the northeast or the east. You know, can't really tell the exact angle, but they appear to have come from this direction. An additional work out there might allow us to refine the story a little further. And based on the patterning, it looks like this side where the British were moving, and these are where the Americans were firing from this way. So you have the Americans to the east, and you have the British to the west. What way they were traveling right now, we can't really tell. We can't tell if they're going up north along the wall or coming south now down from the wall. So that has yet to be resolved. But we are getting a picture of what was happening in this field on the morning or afternoon of August 29th. Then we moved on to another one, which I was really excited about. The second location. This here is on Prospect Lane, literally right across the street from the Quaker Meeting House. And we do know the Quaker Meeting House was being used as a barracks by the British, and we do know that American forces were encamped on the hill, on Quaker Hill on the day, and that the British pushed their way through it. And in fact, I'm not going to read these, but Lieutenant Frederick Mackenzie, he himself talks specifically about what was happening on Quaker Hill that day. That, you know, when they were moving up the West Main Road, they came near Sherman's house, and that's where the engagement started. Well, here's where we were working. Here's where some of the British forces were earlier, and this is Sherman's house right here. So they were coming up here, and in this area, they met with their first engagement. So I was really excited about the potential for what we were finding in this location, the potential for what we could find in this location. Context, here we are right here, moving up East Main Road, up here towards Quaker Lane. So again, the British are pushing their way, the Americans are retreating up East Main Road. We're coming up, this is a little later in the morning. They've pushed past the Historical Society here, and they're working their way up north. Still, the Americans stay here. They're not retreating yet. 8:45, a lot of people are up here. The foot regiments are coming up this way, and they're starting to push the Americans off the hill. And then, 9:15, the Americans start retreating their way, moving their way back towards the lines at the base of Butts Hill Fort. So based on that, again, who might have been in this area and what could we expect when we're out doing the work? Well, the most likely candidates, again, you have Colonel Wigglesworth, his regiment, Colonel William Shepard, Colonel James Livingston, his advance guard of 1st Canadians, and Colonel Henry Jackson's detachment of Continentals. Those are the individuals we knew were in the area, so we could find evidence of any of them. On the British side, again, we have the 43rd Regiment of Foot. We have Von Hume, which we talked about earlier. What's that, the 38th? And they're all under command of Sir Robert Pigott. So these are the American sides and the British side, who was in the area or in the neighborhood on the morning of August 29th. So we went out there on what was forecast to be an absolutely dreary, miserable day. And as it turned out, it wasn't that bad. We got rained on maybe for about a half an hour, maybe an hour, but then it cleared up, and it was, other than being a little windy, it was a fine day. And we found a few things. We found an iron nut. We also found a pintle, a hinge to a shutter. We found a brass cap. None of these are battle related. This item, on the other hand, is a little interesting. We don't know what its exact date. It is a white metal bridle boss that would have been on a horse. There were items of this that were on hand and used in the late 18th century, but they're more common in the 19th century. So we have no idea if they were associated with one of the officers that was riding a horse in the area, or if it was just from a farmer's plow horse. several decades later. We can't be certain. But despite my excitement, I was so excited, we got the big whammy. We got absolutely nothing. So we were all excited, get out there, and we found, a lot of domestic field trash, farmers' field trash. But one of the things, so next steps in terms of what we do on this site, I think there's a real potential out there. When we use our metal detecting, we use what are known as VLF, very low frequency metal detectors. The advantage of the VLF detectors are they allow you to discriminate what kind of metals you're actually reading underground. It can discriminate between iron, nickel, gold, silver, tin, that sort of stuff. So it gives you an idea when you're reading it what kind of material is down there. So if you're really kind of toned in on certain materials, regimental buttons, musket balls, that sort of stuff, you can kind of look at your display and say, okay, this is a potential candidate, so let's look at this, or we're not. The limitation of them is they really don't have a very, very deep ability to penetrate through the ground. At best, you're really only looking at a foot, and more often than not, less than that. There are other machines called pulse induction machines that allow you to go much deeper. Unfortunately, the pulse induction machines, they do not allow you to discriminate metals. So an iron nail is going to give you the same signal as a musket ball. So you can go after anything. In these areas in particular, there are old historic farm fields where it has a lot of noise in them. With the PI machines, you're just tracing every target, and it's really hit or miss. So my thought is next steps in terms of what's happening on Quaker Hill is we need to get out there and actually do some archaeology, meaning we actually need to do a test pit or two. So we can actually dig into the ground, read the stratigraphic column, figure out what the depth of the fill is and what the integrity of the subsoil is to see if there is any integrity and any potential for the original landscape to be preserved and any potential for battle artifacts to remain there. But given the activity and the action that was on the hill, I think that there still is a really good potential for stuff to be out there and in the immediate vicinity in the neighborhood. Unfortunately, it has been built up since 1778, which hides things, but I still think that there is some potential out there. And there's potential elsewhere on Aquidneck Island as well. As I said, the Battle of Rhode Island is listed in the National Register of Historic Places, but it was listed in the 70s, and they arbitrarily defined the boundary of the National Register district to these two areas, the fort itself and the battlefield itself. However, knowing what we know, you have this blob's right up here, and then you have this all down here. There was activity engagements that are associated with the battlefield all throughout. So there's really potential anywhere in these areas for there to be materials associated with the battle. Not to mention the fact that the British were here and they occupied Aquidneck Island for a couple years. So there's materials that are not only associated, the potential for not only be associated with the Battle of Rhode Island, but materials that could also be associated with the British occupation of Newport as well. So there is a really good potential, and here's just one of the period maps of the time that shows, that there was all this activity all along Aquidneck Island, from the Seconic River and the passage to Fort Barton over here down, right straight down to Newport. So what's next? So these finds are preliminary only. We've only been out there a few times for, maybe a total of 16 hours. There's still more to look at. We want to get on the other side of that stone wall to see if, in fact, there are more materials over there. Are there musket balls, or is it really confined to the east side of that stone wall, really reinforcing our opinion that that's the line that they were traveling up and down. We hope to find additional materials. We know that at the time, there were British warships that were shelling the island. They were coming this way. Perhaps we'll find cannonballs associated with the firing from the vessels that were anchored off the west side of the island. But these are preliminary only. There's a lot more yet to do. We want to do this work to continue to refine our narrative. Again, we have we know the story. We know what was happening to some extent at the redoubt where the first Rhode Island was stationed. To study that would be amazing. But It's these small engagements, the skirmishes, that are really interesting. We have an idea of what it is that the British and what it is the Americans wish to record and wish to report to their superiors. Archaeology gets beyond that. It's like, okay, archaeology in theory is a non-biased record. So we can look at some of the stuff that's out there and give us a fuller picture of what actually happened versus what the officers decided to let others know happened, which there is a very, very big difference. So we want to continue to revise this narrative. We want to get a bigger picture of the battle, what was happening, what was going on, where people were, where people moved, where the regiments were, what time these actions took place. Most of the battlefield, you can just travel up the road here, and it's been lost to development between, housing developments, industry, golf courses. A lot of the action is probably lost. And it is imperative for us to understand this engagement that not many people know about, but the soldiers that were involved in it pointed out how significant and important it was. We need to learn about this before it is completely lost. And we only have one shot at recordation. The thing about archaeology is anytime you remove an artifact from its archaeological context, the site is killed. So, I've heard, colleagues refer to archaeology as if we were doctors that kill our patient every time we do surgery on them, which it's true, because we are. Once we remove it, it's lost. So we need to make sure we're exact and record as much as we can. So although the material and its location in the ground have been lost, somebody can reconstruct that at some point in time and use that for interpretive purposes. But that's why it's imperative that this work be done and everything be recorded, because we've probably lost most of the battlefield already. And so, unfortunately, that information is lost. So anything left that's out there, we really should make sure it's recorded as best as it can be so that we can use this information for interpretation, for understanding our role in what was happening that day. So I do have to say that if you're interested in the Battle of Rhode Island, please reach out to the Battle of Rhode Island Association. If you have property in there and you're interested in learning what might have happened, I would suggest to reach out to Jim Stern or some of the other members of the Battle of Rhode Island. Reach out to them and they can point you in the right direction or talk to you about doing some work. But I'm sure I've bored you enough by now. So at that, I'll end it, and I'll just open the floor up to questions.
What about skeletons?
That's a good question. I mean, of course, there's a lot of us that want to know where Hessian's Hole is, where the Hessians were buried. We don't know yet. We know where its general location of where it's reported on maps, but the hole itself has not been found. But that is very true. When battles took place, there was no embalming back then or anything, so people were buried generally in fairly shallow graves, not far from where they fell. So they could be anywhere. They could be anywhere. We haven't come across them yet. I would say in normal circumstances, they would probably be below the detection range of some of these metal detectors, but given how they probably were rapidly buried and shallowly buried, maybe not. So that is something we need to keep an eye out for.
Who would have buried them?
Well, it could have been anybody. You would have had the soldiers themselves, if there was a ceasefire and a time to realize to get it, because you didn't want the diseases out there, you didn't want all that stuff sitting around. So there was often ceasefires. I don't know of any record of one, but the opportunities to bury, you would have a lot of the locals. They would go out there, and particularly those that had family in there would want to make sure it wasn't their families or their friends. So there were houses around here, so they would have done it. So it could have been anyone and all of them.
One question, do you want to mention that some of the artifacts you found are downstairs?
I did mention that, but they are. Actually, no, I mentioned that they're here. But yes, some of them that we did collect are actually on display down below. Stephen can point you there. But there are some of the musket balls and some of the other, the buckles and stuff that we did collect. They are actually on display down below. Yes?
Didn't the French come over and document a lot of the battlefields after the war?
The French were in Newport, so yes. They did come out here. They mapped the location. That some of the French diaries are being translated now. Yes, Yeah, because what happened, the battle itself occurred, and it was several months later that the British eventually left. Several months, or was it a year? It was a year, yeah. I was like, wait a minute, month-wise, but it was a year later, right? That the British finally evacuated Newport. And that's when the French were here when they came over. And that's one of the other things that we forget. One of the significant aspects of this engagement, it was the first joint engagement between the American and the French in the entire war. But it's not, people don't remember, because again, we didn't come away victorious and didn't achieve the objective. But that is something to remember. You know, the French, you look what after Saratoga, and of course at Yorktown, the involvement down at Yorktown, the French were pivotal in our success. And this was the first time, and it was very close to being the last time too. So, Charlotte?
I was wondering what happens when a lead musket ball hits a stone wall. Presumably stone wins, so you're not going to see impact scars. But is there enough lead perhaps smeared on the stone to leave any sort of trace?
Oftentimes they just got flattened, and there wasn't much loss of lead at all. You can actually look at you sometimes can actually see impressions, but it depends on where in flight the ball was. Was it soon after it left the musket, or had it reached terminal velocity and then started slowing down and hit things? So it depends on where, but we actually found everything from what would be a 0 deformation, a drop ball, to 1, very, very low deformation, to some that were highly deformed, and it appears they were found next to the stone wall and they were highly impacted. So it looked like we had everything out there.
But have you metal detected any walls to see if there's like bits of musket ball embedded in?
We have looked at some of the walls. There's a lot of material out there, but again, these walls have been part of an agricultural landscape, and as you can imagine, stuff was actually put up. And not to mention the fact, immediately right on the stone wall, as you know, in a lot of fields, there's a little overgrowth there, so it's hard to get right up to it in some cases. Yes?
I was just wondering, as you're showing them marching through, how are the musket balls being made while everything's moving around?
They would have done it in camp ahead of time. So they would have their pouches, they would have a lot of them were actually, they had prepared cartridges, which would be a paper cartridge that actually had the powder shot as well as the balls, so it could be rapidly loaded into the musket itself through the top. So they weren't doing that on the fly, more or less. Most of that was done in camp in preparation for the next day's advance. The interesting thing is, though, black powder is notoriously dirty. So it was very, very important that these soldiers, and they're always cleaning their muskets because they had to, because by using the black powder, the rifle would fill up and it'd foul pretty quickly. So you'd only get off, a dozen or so shots before you'd have to clean it, because there'd be so much junk in the barrel itself that the ball wouldn't be able to pass through at some point in time. Yeah.
So a soldier would carry a brush and pick. So what would you do on the fly is you would brush the area where the carbon is built up, you take your pick, and then you punch a hole into where the powder is supposed to go into, so you get your musket shot off.
Yes.
Can you clarify the Hessians' whole thing? Like, how many died? Were they documented that there was a mass burial for Hessian fatalities in one place, but nobody knows who that is?
That's correct. I don't have the number on how many, but that was what it was, because the Hessian forces, they advanced 3 times on the redoubt with the 1st Rhode Island, and they were repulsed each time, and they took casualty. And in fact, I can't remember who actually this quote is attributed to, but essentially they said that if their officers had asked them to advance again, they would have mutinied because they were getting a lot of pushback, and they did suffer fatalities, and they weren't buried far from there. But there is the story is that there was a mass grave for those that fell near. And the thought is it's somewhere on the golf course.
But even at the time, they didn't, because they stayed on Aquidneck for another year, or whatever. But there wasn't like any markers, or the Hessians didn't.
Right. That's unfortunately the case. That is, rarely were these soldiers' graves marked. You know, we're finding that all the time. One of my old advisors at the University of Connecticut, used to be the former Connecticut State archaeologist, he was recently called in at the Battle of Richfield in Connecticut, where they came across American soldiers that were not marked, that were just under, as they ended up being under somebody's house that they were just putting in a new footprint in, and they found it. But these were not marked. And if you actually walk the Battle Road in up at Minuteman National Park in Concord, in Lincoln, excuse me, there's graves all along the road, and the markers know that they mark the approximate location, but even they don't know where they are because they were unmarked. Sometimes, you know, they would strip the bodies and take what they could use. Other times they just put them in the ground. Yes?
Well, I just wanted to address this idea of mass grave. We saw that there were a total of 38 British soldiers killed. 11 of them were in the 22nd Regiment, a few of them were in some of the other British regiments. So that leaves maybe 18 or 20 Hessians killed in the battle. So mass grave, we're not talking hundreds of bodies,
Right.
we're talking maybe 8 or 10 at given locations, they were all put in one spot. So
Yeah.
the odds of finding it get pretty slim.
Yeah, it's a large landscape that you really, you are kind of looking for a needle in a haystack, you know. And a landscape that's changed an awful lot since when it was occupied during the battle. Yes?
I live in the neighborhood of Hessian Hole, and it's always been understood that Freeborn Street used to run to the bay. The street did.
Mm-hmm.
It used to. It doesn't today. But today, I understand, it's now part of the golf course at the sixth hole in that area there. The sixth hole of the golf course.
Well, if you can get us access to it. I happen to know of an archaeologist who has done some work out there before.
It's family. I mean, the family owned it and all that. So I'm just telling you what we always understood.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes, like in the case of Parker's Revenge, you know, even if you know the general neighborhood, might be able to pin it down. You know, so.
They never found it.
Never found it. Looked for it, never found it.
Can that ground penetrating radar distinguish bones from
That's a good question. Generally, no. However, I have a colleague that's, you know, who does this, and he's actually working down at the Jamestown settlement down in Virginia. And he's actually sent me images of where they've run over graves, and he's actually able to pull out the skeleton. However, it's extremely difficult because when you're actually looking at an acoustic signature from a GPR machine, there are any number of activities that could replicate a similar signature. And considering the landscape itself has changed so much, it could be, or it could be somebody doing an old builder's trench or something like that. You would need to ground truth it anyway. But the use of GPR is evolving. And, you know, maybe someday, unfortunately, we are in a glaciated landscape, and that complicates us up here in the Northeast. Elsewhere in the country, it's an amazing tool. For us, it's like, it sometimes can help, but it's not quite as useful for us.
Is the earth here conducive to preserving remains?
No. Well, actually, it really depends on the microenvironment. Where if you're looking at well-drained sands and where specifically it was used, yeah, you can actually find good bones. I've actually, you know, excavated remains that are, you know, 500-600 years old that, you know, you still have hair and it's great. I've also excavated remains that are 150 years old and there's virtually nothing left. So it depends specifically on the very specific location. What you have right here might vary different from what's in the back of the room.
Just one more on that. Barker's Brook flows to the bay from the West Main Road. And when you're back by the pond back there, there is a cemetery. It's a cemetery that was a family cemetery for the farm that was there. It is not the Hessian Hole. That has been very much verified from what I see. The graves are unmarked. There are stones there. They're unmarked, but it was a family cemetery as far as I know.
Chase? Speaker Chase? Chase.
I have it written down somewhere.
Yes.
Who is paying them as they are sort of professional soldiers? And are they also getting some of their food goods from the farms around here as they're in this area?
Who is paying them? Well, the British were getting paid by the British government.
Our people.
Yeah, well, we were supposed to be getting paid from the Continental Congress, but that is a huge story in and of itself. That the soldiers, multiple times throughout the war, were expecting payment, hadn't received it in quite a long time, and were dissatisfied with that. But to the other thing, yes, that did happen. A lot of the locally that they were foraging what they could from the local farmers. Who sometimes were displeased with that as well because they're being paid on our side elsewhere in American currency, which was worthless. But so there's a lot of dissatisfied people around here. But it's interesting because the British themselves, when they were retreating from the north part of the island, they're moving back. They were trying to remove anything that the Americans could use. There's stories of them going in and fouling wells and stuff like that to prevent them from drinking and stuff like that. So they were trying to, all's fair in love and war, right? And they were doing what they could to, if you can't supply your army, that's number one. And your army's not going to be around for that long. Yes?
One of the big things that Rochambeau brought to help the cause was French silver. People are finally getting paid with real.
Right. When you got real specie, that made people happy. That's right. As opposed to continental dollars, which were worthless. Or promises, or promissory notes, that sort of stuff,